Part 114. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1133. It is true that the Anjun Prince's mansion needs to be changed, but it is not something that can be accomplished overnight. The large house opposite Prince Rong's mansion was left over from the previous dynasty. Because the two families have always been close, Fan Zijin also took a fancy to this area at first sight. He and Chi Heiran went to see it. The houses inside were well maintained. The key: there is a house built on the same side of the mountain as Prince Rong's mansion, and there is flowing water flowing down to form a lake. Although it is not as majestic as the big lake in Prince Rong's mansion, it is still beautiful. Fan Zijin chose this area, and with his title of County King, it was just right to open up the three mansions in a row. Fan Zijin was very happy. He has always liked to enjoy himself. In the past, he didn't build gardens because he was in a hurry and didn't have enough money. Now he doesn't need to support the national treasury with the money he earns from business. And there is enough space for him to develop. Naturally he doesn't want to wrong himself under multiple conditions. Fan Zijin asked Chi Heiran cheerfully, "Do you want to repair your garden too?" Chi Heiran thought for a while and shook his head. "My garden is already beautiful enough, how can I repair it?" Fan Zijin curled his lips. "It was also repaired by Qin Fang, so you can just relay the floor tiles. If I ask you, you should change the layout of the garden. Your place is so big, so separate it and build a few more. Wouldn't a garden with a different style be better?" Chi Heiran only pays attention to eating and playing, and has no interest in gardens, so he waved his hand and said, "You build it, and Aling and I will come to visit. I think my garden is very good, so there is no need to change it." Fan Zijin regretted that he still wanted to build gardens together between the two prefectures. Fan Zijin changed from a duke to a county king, and the mansion had to be expanded by more than half, while Chi Heiran was changed from a county king to a prince, so the mansion still had to be expanded. Several places that were previously separated to avoid suspicion were dismantled and returned to Chi Heiran. Under the name of Heiran, just a little more tidying up will do. Therefore, when Anjun Prince's mansion was still drastically tearing down the walls and opening the door, Chi Heiran had already hung the plaque of the prince's mansion on the door, set up a banquet for 3 days, and sang at the hall for 2 days. For the prince, Little Bear and his 2 younger brothers greeted the guests for 3 days. When the banquet was over, he wished he could lie on the bed and not get up. This is more tiring than fighting. The tiger head and the little lion nodded with empathy. "It seems that I have copied books for a month. Let's go to the palace tomorrow. I want to go to the study to study." Mu Yangling was also so tired that he collapsed on the bed and couldn't get up. When Chi Heiran came in, he saw her lying on the bed and fell asleep, so he hurriedly asked Li Shun to bring hot water, and took off her shoes to soak her feet himself. Mu Yangling woke up with a start. Chi Heiran pressed her foot. "There are so many bubbles, let's get tired." Mu Yangling squinted his eyes and half leaned on the bed, feeling drowsy from being pressed comfortably. Seeing this, Chi Heiran sighed. In the future, this kind of banquet doesn't need to be a big deal, just invite 2 or 3 good friends to come over as guests. This is what it should be. If our family doesn't even serve wine after being promoted to prince, what about those who have to be named princes? Mu Yangling yawned and said, 3 days is short, but Zijin, I plan to ask for 5 days. Chi Heiran curled his lips. He is so energetic that he has nowhere to go. We don't need to compare with him. Both husband and wife are not good at greeting guests, so they were exhausted this time, and they got up late the next day by coincidence. As soon as Chi Heiran opened his eyes, he felt that something was wrong. As soon as he opened the curtains, it was already bright outside, and the sun was almost halfway up. Chi Heiran was taken aback, and asked Li Chun, who had come in to serve him when he heard the noise, "Where are the princes and the others?" Li Chun said with a strange expression, "Master Shizi, I went to the palace with the 2 young masters early in the morning, saying that he was going to go to school, and the fourth young master and the little princess haven't woken up yet. Chi Heiran raised his eyebrows. They have become more diligent than ever before. Mu Yangling hugged the quilt and said in a daze, don't they just enter the palace and cause trouble? Chi Heiran was stunned for a moment, jumped up immediately, put on his clothes in a hurry and ran out. I'll go to the palace to have a look, brother is in a better mood these 2 days. At this time, Xiao Xiong just knocked down the 2 guards, took a towel and wiped his sweat, and rushed to Xiaobao. You have been sneaking around very fast these 2 days, and you just run away every day, and you don't know how to help me. Xiaobao smiled apologetically, I'm catching up with my mother to choose my side concubine. If you catch me in the past few days, let me see the portrait. How dare I stay in one place for a long time? Little Bear's eyes widened, concubine? How old are you this year, why did you choose concubine? Little Treasure saw it strangely and said, I am 14 years old, and I will be 15 after the new year. I am still young. The main concubine can remarry in a few years, but the side concubine is accepted at this time. The royal families of all dynasties are like this time. By the way, you will be 13 this year, so the fourth aunt didn't say to make arrangements for you. It's impossible, little Xiong cried. Prince Wan clearly said that having sex before the age of 17 or 18 is not good for your health. Why did the imperial aunt give you a side concubine at this time? My mother said, I have to. You can only marry a daughter-in-law when you reach the age of 18. Xiao Xiong felt bad. During this period of time, they followed Wang Tai's yin-yang study and learned a lot about health preservation and the relationship between men and women. Although he is not a person who is greedy for life and afraid of death, he is definitely not a person who will damage his body. Xiao Xiong took Xiaobao's hand and said solemnly, you can't accept the side concubine yet, go, I'll talk to Uncle Huang with you. At this time, the 4 children who had just run to the harem after class bumped into 2 young women in the small garden. Xiaoan fell back directly, and it was the tiger head who caught the person with quick eyes and quick hands. The person opposite was not so lucky, and sat down on the ground. The woman on the ground stared wide-eyed. Although her eye circles turned red immediately, she didn't cry. Apart from the prince, the only boys who could run rampant in the palace were the young masters of Prince Rong's mansion and Prince An's mansion. The children were not unreasonable, they knew that they ran too fast and bumped into someone, so they apologized and turned around to run again. The girl who was knocked down didn't say anything, but the maid supporting her said angrily, you just say sorry when you bump into someone? How decent is it to run rampant in the palace? Shiu'er, shut up. Huilai blushed, and hurriedly saluted the children, young masters, please forgive me, Shiu'er's outspoken words did not mean to offend you. Huilai paused for a moment and said, the slaves are fine, young masters, let's go and play. Xiaoan glanced at the aggrieved Shiu'er, turned her head to Huili and said, it is true that we are wrong about this matter, where are you from? We will send someone to apologize to you later, don't delay your errand. It means that they will send things to the place where you work, help you speak for the person in charge, and don't make the other party embarrass you. Huilai has been in the palace for many years, so she can naturally hear the implication. She knows that the young masters will not pursue Shiu'er's unreasonableness, so she hurriedly declined with a smile. Shiu'er was a court lady who had just entered the palace not long ago. She snorted softly and said, if you apologize sincerely, go to the East Palace. Our sister Hui is the prince's personal palace lady. You can bump into it as soon as you say it. Shiu'er bit the words close-fitting grand lady very hard. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1134. Huilai's complexion changed drastically, she gave Shiu'er a hard look, and hurriedly pulled her to kneel down to plead guilty. Xiaoan waved his hand, and said indifferently, this has nothing to do with you, but you are the prince's brother's personal maid? Why haven't we seen you? Huilai blushed slightly, and said in a low voice, "The servant has just been photographed to serve His Highness." "Just went and became a palace maid? Was that sent by the imperial aunt? But they haven't seen her in Cunning Palace either." Xiaoan was a little puzzled, but Hu Tiou became impatient, and said to him, "Let's go, I'm starving to death." Qi Wensu looked at Xiaoan, then at Huilai, thinking of the news he had heard in Cunning Palace these 2 days. He leaned into Xiaoan's ear and said, "She is the queen mother who arranges for the prince's elder brother to teach personnel, and she can be regarded as a personal palace lady." The tiger head and the little lion's ears also heard it, and they went to see Huilai in shock. Huilai's face turned redder, while Xiu looked at them with some pride. In her opinion, Huilai's status is higher than theirs. She will be the prince's pillow in the future. When the prince ascends the throne and becomes emperor, Huilai will become a concubine. Although she has not been in the palace for a long time, she also knows that only the one with the yellow belt is the prince, and the others are the sons of the ministers who came to the palace to study with him. But no matter how powerful their father is, he is still a child and white. How can Huilai, the future concubine, have such a noble status? So she didn't think there was anything wrong with treating the opposite child like this. But Huilai hated her to death. Xiu was her fellow townsman. She knew that it was not easy to survive in the deep palace, so she chose her when she had the opportunity to choose the little palace maid for the sake of her fellow townspeople. Firstly, they can take care of each other, and secondly, she also needs subordinates who are loyal to her, but who knew that she could be so stupid after entering the palace for half a year. Huilai decided to send her away after returning home. Even if she couldn't be sent away, such a person should not be relied on. It is a disaster to keep such people around. Seeing that the 4 young masters were staring at her with wide eyes, Huilai's face turned even redder. She stood awkwardly for a while and then said in a low voice, "If you have no other orders, the servants will leave first." Xiaoan and Wensu bit their ears. "Are you sure she is the prince's elder brother's consort?" Wende nodded. "I've seen her at my mother's place, and there is another one besides her, who is not as beautiful as her." Xiaoan and the others were even more shocked. The 4th aunt added yin-yang studies to them. Dr. Wang said that it is best not to have sex before the age of 17. It was about the life and safety of the prince's elder brother, Xiaoan, and the twins became anxious, and ran to Cunning Palace after pulling Wensu. Wensu couldn't go out of the palace after school, so he didn't take the course of Wang Tai with them. Although he knew that they had recently supplemented a new course of yin and yang, but he only knew that it was about the difference between men and women, and it was not more specific. New. At this moment, seeing them rushing to Cunning Palace in a hurry, he hurriedly asked what happened. Xiaoan said a few simple words. In short, the prince's brother is still young, and it is not healthy physically or psychologically to accept the room at this time. For the sake of the life and safety of the prince's elder brother, they must stop this from happening as soon as possible. Qi Wensu also became anxious when he heard this, and took the lead in running ahead. 4 children broke into the Cunning Palace, and the queen who was handling palace affairs put down her paperwork and said to the female officials beside her, "Take them to the side hall, let them play there, and let the small kitchen prepare some food for them." Before saying a word, 4 children rushed in. Mother, mother, we have something important to tell you." Qi Wensu was sweating profusely. Xiaoan's faces were also full of anxiety, and they stomped their feet and said, "Auntie Huang, we have something urgent to tell you." Li Jinghua sent out the maid in charge and the chief servant who reported the palace affairs, leaving only the maids and maids in her palace left in the palace. Li Jinghua asked with a smile, "Did you make trouble again?" The 4 children shook their heads one after another, expressing that they were very obedient and never caused trouble. Li Jinghua said with a half smile, "Then who hid behind the rockery and threw stones at Mr.? Tell me, what is your big deal?" Xiaoan felt ashamed for a moment, and immediately put the shred of shame behind her when she heard the queen's question, "Auntie Huang, we knocked down a court lady in the small garden just now." The smile on Li Jinghua's face gradually disappeared, and she rubbed his head. "Don't worry, those two court ladies are innocent, and the imperial aunt will punish them. It was our fault that we bumped into them." "Why did the imperial aunt punish them?" Xiaoan was puzzled for a moment, then stomped her feet and said, "Oh, that's not what we want to talk about." Li Jinghua laughed, "You don't want to punish them, what do you want to do?" Xiaoan said clearly, "First, we were the ones who bumped into people, so it's our fault. We have already apologized to them and promised to give them an apology. How can we make the emperor's aunt punish them? Secondly, what we want to say is that you can't find a room for the prince's brother. It's harmful to your health. Auntie, you must have been deceived by someone. The prince's brother is only 14 years old. How could you ask the maid to teach personnel affairs? Didn't he harm the prince's brother?" Li Jinghua was taken aback, seeing the serious faces of the four children. She asked, "Who taught you this? Who needs to teach this?" "It's written in the book." The little lion couldn't help becoming anxious when he saw that the emperor's aunt didn't listen to Xiaoan. He couldn't recite the book, so he could only look anxiously at Xiaoan. Xiaoan immediately recited the medical books they had learned recently, and finally said, "Physician Wang has said that it is best for men and women to marry after the 17th or 18th. This is not only beneficial to physical and mental health, but also important to the health of offspring. The intercourse is too early, the number of children will be rare in the future, and the number of children will be thin. Even if children can be born, many will die and get sick. The fourth aunt also said that we will not get married until we are 18, but the prince's brother is only 14 this year." Li Jinghua didn't know how to answer for a while. She is from a noble family, so she naturally knows these truths. In the Li family, women only get married when they reach the age of 16, and men only get married when they are 17 or 18. It was arranged because they were afraid that they would be seduced outside, and it was better for the family to arrange housekeeping and guidance than to mess around outside. The royal family has always been precocious. In order to spread the branches and leaves for the royal family, it is natural to teach the prince personnel early. It is too late for Xiaobao to arrange and guide the maids at the age of 14. Guide the maid. Li Jinghua opened her mouth, and said after a while, "This is the rule of the royal family." Fart, several children jumped. "Who set the rules?" Xiaoan asked, "Are the rules more important than the life and safety of my prince brother?" The little lion came up with an idea directly. "The rules of the royal family are not set by the emperor, just ask the emperor to change it." Hudu expressed his support. "Who dares to oppose me to beat him?" Qi Wensu agreed. "Then I have to sleep with a court lady at the age of 14? I don't want to. What if she kicks me out of bed?" The kid was always kicked out of bed when he slept with the tiger-headed lion cub. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1135. The queen looked at the four children with embarrassment, and met their simple and expectant eyes, and she really couldn't refuse for a while. At this time, Xiaoxiang also dragged Xiaobao to meet the emperor, talking about the harm of taking a concubine at such a young age. Qi Xiaoyuan, who was smiling and watching his nonsense, gradually became serious. In fact, Xiaoxiang just changed what his mother said to the emperor. Teenagers are most curious about sex. Mu Yangling first asked imperial physician Wang to tell them the differences between men and women and some basic knowledge of sex from a medical point of view, and then it was her turn to play. She feels that the reason why children are curious and passionate about sex is because they have always vaguely understood, and they are embarrassed to ask if they don't understand, so they can only explore by themselves. Since this is the case, it is better to let them have a deeper understanding. Now the level of children has reached how children are produced. If Chi Heiran told the children at this time that they were sent by the mother-in-law, even the tiger head would be able to spray Chi Heiran with saliva. Now that you understand it, the next step is naturally to warn. Premature sexual intercourse will make the sperm thinner, which will hinder the offspring. Second, it will make people age faster, which is not good for the health, and the sexual intercourse will end early in the future. Third, the incidence of various sexually transmitted diseases will increase. Mu Yangling didn't tell them in a summary bit by bit, but collected various examples to illustrate. In this way, the impressions of the children are not insignificant, and the 13-year-old little bear who has been taken care of is even more familiar with it. Now Xiaoxiang is not as embarrassed as before when he heard the soldiers say nasty words, so he can seriously talk to Uncle Huang about the crown prince accepting the side concubine and accepting the house. Xiao Bao, who was standing beside him, blushed, and lowered his head to avoid Qi Ziyuan's gaze. Qi Ziyuan waved his hand to interrupt Xiaoxiang, and asked, "Then tell Uncle Huang, after your concubine mother and concubine have finished talking to you, do you still want to marry a wife?" Little Xiang, who had always looked normal, blushed. "Of course I want to marry a wife. What does this have to do with marrying a wife? Your mother and concubine will, talk about sex so terrible, you still want to marry a wife." Qi Ziyuan was slightly embarrassed to talk about this topic with the junior. The little bear said generously, "Mother just said that early sex is not good, but she didn't say that sex is bad. Besides, I married a wife to fly with each other and live a good life, not for this. Why would it be, don't want to marry a wife?" Qi Ziyuan turned his head to look at his son who was blushing but listening carefully, and sighed slightly in his heart. He thought he was strong in all aspects, but he was indeed far behind in teaching children. Qi Ziyuan felt a little sorry in his heart, so he said to his son, "After class today, you go out of the palace with Little Bear to attend the class of Dr. Wang. Your second brother is not young, so take him with you." Xiaobao responded with a blushing face. No matter how strong Qi Ziyuan's heart is, it's not easy for him to talk about such a topic with his brother-in-law, so he can only find his brother and ask him to help him teach his son while educating the little bear. Qi Heiran left with a flushed face. He knew about the extra lessons Aling gave to the children, because he had also been pinched to talk to them a few times, telling them some common sense that neither Wang Tai nor Aling could say. He didn't agree with getting married early, but he didn't have such a big reaction as Aling. Seeing that she had rigidly set the age for getting married, which was almost becoming a family rule, he could only accept it. But he didn't expect to be tossed into the palace by a few children. Before leaving, Qi Heiran asked his elder brother cautiously, "Xiaobao is the crown prince, and he will take the side concubine after he is 18. At that time, the emperor just took a deep look at his younger brother and kicked him out annoyed. Obviously, he didn't make up his mind. Although the Qi royal family is only the first generation, the rules of the previous dynasties are there. The prince has always been 12 or 30 years old, 14 or 5 to accept side concubines, and 16 or 7 to marry the main concubine. When it comes to the Qi family, it is changed to 10-8 directly marry the princess. I'm afraid that historians and officials will say that Qi's mud legs. What's more, 18 is indeed too late. The royal family is in a hurry to spread branches and leaves, and get married at 18, so it will take 19 or 20 to have the first child. Qi Ziyuan hesitated for a moment. Qi Ziyuan was so distressed that he wanted to go to Cunning Palace, but Li Jinghua stopped him as soon as he entered. "You came just in time, I'm about to be annoyed to death by the 4 children, come and help me deal with them." Qi Ziyuan once again fell into a sea of misery. The last 4 children were forcibly sent away by Qi Ziyuan under the pretext of being late for afternoon class. The 4 children wanted to come to the emperor and empress to continue persuading the work after their afternoon class, but they were carried out by Xiaoxiang and Xiaobao, and said, "Let's go, today the prince brother and Wensu will go to the palace with us to attend the imperial doctor's class, and they will probably sleep at our house tonight." Gone. The four children diverted their attention in an instant, and when they saw Xiaobao immediately surrounded him, they warned him righteously, "You must not accept the room, it is very dangerous." Little Treasure didn't expect the four younger brothers to be busy with this all day today, and was moved and embarrassed for a while, so he could only respond with a flushed face. Mu Yangling, who had already received the news in advance, asked Imperial Physician Wang to add extra lessons for Wen Chen and Wen Su, and then took the four children to the small study to clarify the whole matter. Mu Yangling stroked his chin and said, "If you hadn't smashed this matter, I really didn't know that the palace would have raped the princes so early." Mu Yangling was firmly on the children's side, so after Xiaobao came back from class, she talked with him alone in the small study. Seeing that he was a little embarrassed, Mu Yangling smiled and said, "Don't be shy, just treat it as a homework that you need to ask your aunt for advice. Your father and queen are relatively shy and traditional, so it's not easy to tell you clearly, I might not be able to open my mouth to them, why don't I talk to my aunt first?" Mu Yangling winked at him playfully, "Auntie has always claimed to be your confidant big sister." Xiaobao's nervous mood eased a little, and he said with a flushed face, "I always listen to the arrangements of my father and mother." "I know," Mu Yangling said with a smile, "the imperial palaces of all dynasties have had this rule, but each dynasty lasted only 200 or 300 years. Do I have to be like them?" Mu Yangling pulled out a carriage from the pile of dragon and phoenix toys next to him, put it on the table and said, "This is the carriage of time, it keeps rolling forward, no matter what the dynasty is, the sun rises and sets, and rises again, the days move forward little by little, and everything in the world is also making progress little by little with the advancement of this carriage, so we can look back and learn from experience, but we can't refer to the past for everything, because it has already changed in time. Disappeared, failed, may not be successful at this time, successful, may not be suitable at this time, because the carriage has never stopped, and the world is always changing." What Mu Yangling said was somewhat philosophical, the flush on Xiaobao's face gradually receded, and he began to think seriously. If Mu Yangling talked about sex with him as soon as he came up, he would feel ashamed no matter how dependent he was on her, but what Mu Yangling said now was some philosophical big talk, and the twist in Xiaobao's heart gradually dissipated. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1136. You should know that although aristocratic families and some well-established families will also arrange roommates for their children, they will generally not be younger than 14 years old, and marriages will not be younger than 17 years old, and even if there is a roommate, the elders in the family will. There are also many restrictions on this, but why did the royal families of all dynasties arrange a room for the prince at the age of 12? What's more, they took 1 or 2 side concubines in the room early. In order to spread branches and leaves for the royal family, Xiaobao said in a slightly lower voice, "It's more a precautionary measure. To prevent the death of the emperor, there will be successors. Only by giving birth to heirs early can the hearts of the people, the hearts of ministers, and their own hearts be at ease. Life is impermanent, who knows what will happen tomorrow?" One of the important reasons why the royal family arranged for the maids to sleep after the prince's first sperm was to prevent such accidents. Moreover, people in the royal family didn't live long, and if they had heirs earlier, the children would be able to stand up when they died. However, the earlier you have intercourse, the shorter your lifespan is, and the shorter you are, the more anxious you are to have children, and the earlier you have intercourse. This is almost an endless loop. It's not that Qi Xiaoyuan and Qi Wenchen didn't know this kind of truth, but they didn't want to break it in the past. If it wasn't for Xiao Xiang and Xiao An's troubles, they probably wouldn't take it too seriously, so they followed the rules of the imperial palaces of the past. The royal families of all dynasties have been like this. That's because they never changed from the first generation to the second generation. Should we also learn from them? Get enlightened early, and then give birth to children early. Or miscarriage, or premature death, or sickness, the children who can grow up continue this kind of inheritance, because they are enlightened early, they indulge themselves again and again, and they are obviously sitting on the most abundant medical resources, but the average life expectancy is only 50. Mu Yangling felt endless regret when she said this. In her opinion, the average life expectancy of common people is low because of poor living conditions and shortage of medical resources, but for the royal family and these upper-class people, their life expectancy is not high, but it's because of being too indulgent. The first generation and the second generation of the royal family are all right, and they are somewhat restrained, but the founding emperor has many injuries and his lifespan is generally not long, but the second generation has already begun to spend extravagantly. Gradually hollowed out the body, even if there are occasional people who pay attention to health preservation, there are very few. Mu Yangling vomited as long as she thought that her descendants would one day become the descendants of the former royal family. However, it is impossible to only rely on the family rules set by her, because the general environment is such that even if they are good in nature, they can be led badly, so Mu Yangling hopes to fundamentally improve the general environment. She will not set a lot of rules for future generations, because they may not necessarily abide by them, and it is useless to set them. It is better to educate this generation well, and let them educate the next generation well, so that these things become a matter of course, so that even if it is not a rule, it is a rule. Your father was seriously injured and poisoned in the early years. His body was indeed damaged, but the imperial doctor has been taking care of him for many years. He dare not say that he is completely recovered, but his body is definitely not bad. Xiaobao, you said he can live for a few more years. Xiaobao was surprised by his fourth aunt's straightforwardness, but he still thought about it seriously and said, if the father can always pay attention to health preservation, he will still be strong in 20 or 30 years. 20 or 30 years later, Qi Xiaoyuan will be in his 60s, and Xiaobao will be in his 30s and 40s. What about you? Mu Yangling asked, how long do you think you can live without sudden illness or accident? 50 or 60 years old shouldn't be a problem. That's it? Could it be that your son was not yet 20 at that time? So I think you are completely unfounded. You are enlightened at the age of 12, but how many children can be conceived or born before the age of 16 grow up? Xiaobao said seriously, fourth aunt, I have never had a child. Then go and check, just look up the information of the former royal family, and when you finish the research, come and tell me, how old were the surviving children of the former royal family who were born to their parents? After you finish the research, we will talk again. Xiaobao is the prince, so it is not difficult to look up these information, not to mention that he has a lot of life, and he got several forms the next day after he ordered, not only the age of the parents when the child was born, but also the life expectancy of their parents, own lifespan, age of having first child, etc. What Mu Yangling said is correct. The table records the lifespan and production of the children of the royal family in the past 5 generations. Generally speaking, the output is very large. The worst prince has had 16 children, but he can survive until there were only 8 12-year-olds, not counting miscarriages or children who died at birth, and the survival rate was extremely low. In the table, most of the children who can grow to be over 12 years old are born with fathers over 16 years old. As Mu Yangling said, the fathers are too young and the sperm is too weak, so most of the children born will not grow up. Xiaobao copied the form twice, sent one to his father and one to his mother, and went out of the palace with the original to find Mu Yangling. Mu Yangling said, so I suggest that the palace should abolish these rules. It is best for the prince to arrange a concubine after the age of 17, marry the main concubine after the age of 18, and then accept the side concubine. The relationship between husband and wife is also good. Xiao Bao pondered, I'm afraid the ministers of the former court would not agree. The issue of the royal family's heirs is not only a family matter, but also a state matter. Mu Yangling smiled and said, I didn't say to change the rules with great fanfare, we will do what we do, and we will set the rules when the ministers of the previous court mention it. Your father is the first emperor of Daki. Emperor, his words are the rules, who said we have to abide by the rules of the previous dynasty. This made sense, but he was speechless. Xiaobao asked, Fourth aunt, you told me so many reasons yesterday, you don't just want to change this rule of the royal family, do you? Mu Yangling smiled, took down the Law of Great Qi from the bookshelf, flipped to marriage, clicked on one of them and said, I think this one should be changed as well. That is the age regulation for ordinary people to marry in the law. Among them, the limit for women is after the age of 13, and they must be married before the age of 18, otherwise they will be fined. It was copied from the previous law, and the Qi law did not modify it. In Emperor Sejong's time, this law stipulated that women should be born after the age of 15 and before the age of 20. Later, foreign enemies invaded, the country's population withered, and the age of marriage was repeatedly lowered. It is because the risk of having a child is too great, and the age limit of the previous dynasty will be lowered. Qi LV copied it because the population was really small at that time. After more than 20 years of wars, when the Qi was founded, the population was only in the early 40 million. The population is 50 million, but for the vast territory of Daki, the population is still a bit small. Therefore, the age requirement for marriage has not changed. Xiaobao looked at this law and pondered. If this law is to be changed, the resistance will be more difficult than the conditions for the royal family to change it, because if it is changed, the population growth rate will definitely decrease a lot. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1137. The Chinese people have always paid attention to the fact that having many children and grandchildren is a blessing. The age of marriage is set so early that the population grows very fast. In recent years, grain production has increased, the overall living standards of the people have improved, and the population has grown faster. Only by comparing the small tax collected by the Ministry of Households in the past 10 years can we get a general data. Now Daki has a population of only 50 million, but what about 10 or 20 years from now? If it weren't for the small tax, the population growth would be even higher. The sex tax has always been one of the biggest burdens on the people. To abolish the sex tax, you must first raise the marriage age and establish a certain concept of birth control. Naturally, Mu Yangling would not tell Xiaobao that she aimed to abolish the tax and control the population. She just listed a tree-like data, using the tenant data in her own farm as a reference, and told Xiaobao that under Qiutai Minan, as the standard of living lower tenant fecundity. Little Treasure stared wide-eyed at the tree diagram on the paper. 10 years ago, the family of 4 became 10 today, and based on this rate of reproduction, 20 years later, the family would be at least it can reproduce 36 people. Of course, not all families have this reproduction speed, but this is true for tenants with poor living conditions. What about those wealthy families? Mu Yangling gave him another data. This is the cultivated land data I asked your fourth uncle to obtain from the Ministry of Household Affairs. Now at least 70% of the cultivated land in Daki has been developed. If the population grows, it will inevitably invade the mountains and forests in the future. Opening up wasteland is a way to kill chickens to get eggs, and if you don't open up wasteland, the arable area will not be enough, and the food will not be enough, and then there will be refugees and wars. Mu Yangling looked at Xiaobao full of hope and said, Xiaobao, being an emperor should not only do the current thing well, but also focus on the future. Only by looking farther can you go longer. Xiaobao thought about it. Your father, Uncle Huang, and Uncle Fan have already laid down a land for you, how to protect and build it is up to you. Little Treasure's eyes flashed brightly, and he clenched his fists and said, I see, fourth aunt, the carriage of time is always moving forward, we should look ahead of it, and we shouldn't just deal with what has happened or what has happened like past dynasties. If there is a problem, it should be taken precautions before the problem arises, and dare to be the first. Mu Yangling smiled and nodded. When every dynasty was first established, those in power thought that the dynasty would last forever, but in fact it only took 200 or 300 years, because they never saw further. Xiaobao, you have to remember, you have to look far ahead, but you have to do things in line with the present, because only the ones that are suitable for the present are the most accurate, and time is constantly advancing, and things are constantly changing. What is suitable now may not be suitable for the next year. What do you think is right? What you say doesn't mean it's right, so listen to other people's opinions more, and this is just the suggestion given to you by my aunt. The last point is to stop when you stop, don't hesitate, otherwise all your previous efforts may be in vain. After Mu Yangling finished speaking, he left him in the study. Xiaobao has always been very smart. Although he is not as brilliant as Xiaoan, his thinking ability is not low. Mu Yangling's words had a great impact on him. To sum up, the central idea is, don't just think about reducing corvée, increasing population, and increasing taxes like the emperors of all dynasties. It is true that completing these 3 items is enough to become a wise emperor, but focusing on the longer future, the achievements will be even greater. But there has never been an emperor with such a far-sighted view in history. Xiaobao didn't learn from it, and felt a lot of pressure. Following his fourth aunt's suggestion, he thought about it. If one day the population of Daki was so large that the arable land was used up, how many people would it take? Little Treasure suddenly felt that a large population may not be a good thing, and began to think seriously about reducing the population growth rate. Raising the age of marriage is the first step, but how much? Of course, it is impossible to mention too much at once, so the reaction of the officials must be very fierce, and now the war has not been long, the population loss is a bit high, and it is indeed necessary to replenish some population. Xiaobao sat in the study for a whole day, and when Qi Heiran came back from the palace, he hadn't come out yet. Seeing that Mu Yangling didn't intend to ask people to come out for dinner, he asked secretly, "What did you tell him? Don't provoke him so that he doesn't want to marry a wife and concubine. You know, he has a whole country on his shoulders. Heavy duty." Qi Heiran felt that if the children of their 2 families hadn't been so nervous and had been practiced by Aling many times, the venereal disease cases she mentioned would have a shadow on their sex in the future. Little Xiong is used to rough nerves, but Xiaobao is very delicate, and has not been taught by Aling a few times in the past few years. Seeing his narrow-mindedness, Mu Yangling educated him. "You think I'm teaching Dunlun in the study with him? Those who have their own Dr. Wang to teach, we are discussing the population plan." Qi Heiran stared. "You really let Xiaobao control the population growth?" This is something Qi Heiran can't understand. Those in power don't expect a large population. A larger population means that he will be more successful. She is good enough to encourage him to write a letter to control population growth. This is to see if his road will not work. Which way is Xiaobao? Mu Yangling sighed. "I can't help it. You stubborn people can't understand my long-term vision. I can only recruit a few children to be allies. You and Zijin are far behind them in this regard." Qi Heiran curled his lips. "That's because you taught these children. They usually look good and follow the rules. When they don't pay attention, they come up with some strange ideas. For example, the population growth, you see, look at the Han and Tang dynasties, which emperor didn't lower the marriageable age? It's better for you, but he thought there were too many people and set the marriageable age higher." Mu Yangling said, "It's like a pigsty, it's only so big, it's not enough to raise 3 pigs, 5 pigs are just right, but you are greedy, you tend to raise 10 pigs in it, there is nowhere to sleep, and you only provide feed for 5 out of 10 pigs, do you think the pigsty is in chaos? Chi Heiran pointed at Mu Yangling tremblingly, my great country is a pigsty, is my master a pig? Mu Yangling tilted his head, is that compared to a horse pen? Chi Heiran blows at her. Seeing that his parents were about to quarrel again, Little Bear immediately asked his younger brothers to clean up the food on the table, and shouted, Father, Mother, please talk slowly, let's go have dinner with the prince brother. Xiaoan had already brought the tiger head and they quickly went down with the food. Chi Heiran stared, narrowed his eyes and looked at Xiaoan's back, turned his head and gritted his teeth at Mu Yangling. In the past, Xiaoan was so obedient and well behaved, see what you have taught the child to be. Mu Yangling snorted, and said, don't you big men think that the son teaches himself, and the daughter's wife teaches? Xiaoan is like this because you and Zijin are not doing their duty, let alone what is wrong with him. If you yell at me like this, can he do you want to stay and watch? Naturally, it is better to avoid early. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1138. At the dinner table, only the husband and wife were left, and even the youngest, Little Leopard and Baozu, followed the older brothers to the study room to join in the fun. A group of people poured into the study, and Xiaobao was awakened from his thoughts, only then did he realize that he was extremely hungry. Fortunately, he had finished thinking about what he wanted, so he helped his younger brothers set the table with a smile on his face, and a group of children started eating by themselves. Xiao Xiong and Xiaoan were still concerned about Xiao Bao's acceptance of the side concubine, and said worriedly, did Uncle Huang and Aunt Huang agree to postpone it? Xiao Bao nodded with a smile, you are all so alarmist, just for the sake of my health, father and mother will postpone it. Xiao Xiong and Xiaoan breathed a sigh of relief, and then said, this is not alarmist talk, there are real cases. The little lion nodded while taking care of his younger brothers and sisters, Hudu and I have made notes. If Brother Prince doesn't believe me, I can lend you the notes. Thinking of the sketches of the little lion and the tiger head, Xiao Bao frowned, shook his head and said, forget it, I will ask Dr. Wang and fourth aunt for a lesson plan. Apart from the two of them, Xiaoan may be the only one who can read the notes that little lion and Hudu took. It took him a lot of effort to just read the words, so why not ask Imperial Physician Wang and Mu Yangling for a lesson plan? The little lion didn't care either, and continued to take care of the younger brothers and sisters to eat, and then bowed their heads to eat. Hudu was also busy as he stuffed things into the little lion's bowl while stuffing things into his own mouth. Xiao Bao turned his head and said to Xiao Xiong and Xiaoan, sleep with me tonight, I have something important to discuss with you. The little lion and tiger head raised their heads one after another when they heard the words, what about us? And me? Qi Wensu hastily raised his hand to show that he was there. Xiao Bao turned his head and said to the three of them, whenever you can recite university, I will let you join the political discussion. As soon as the three of them heard that they got together at night to discuss political affairs, they immediately lost interest, and Hudu added, we will never be able to recite university. So in the future, we should never ask us for such things. Xiao Xiong was shocked by the short stories of his younger brothers. Just as he was about to beat someone up, Xiaoan smiled at them and said, it doesn't matter if you can't recite it. You just need to repeat the grade when the time comes. You can go to school with Little Leopard. The tiger head and the little lion were taken aback for a moment, and they all turned to look at their younger brother who was holding a spoon and trying to pick up the rice, and said in disgust, how can we go to school with him at such an age? There's no way, who made your education level always be in the elementary class? Xiaoan said indifferently, Mr. can't always accommodate you, and you will naturally have to repeat the grade. Qi Wensu was also shocked, and was the first to rebel. I will definitely study hard, maybe I will recite university in 2 days. The little lion and tiger head glared at him, and Xiao Bao stroked his second brother's head and boasted, "That's right, if you don't understand anything, come and ask big brother." The tiger-headed little lion, who wanted to go play after dinner, hesitated for a while, and finally went to the small study with Qi Wensu to review his homework and do his homework by the way. The twins were sent back to Mu Yangling, and Qi Heiran hugged the two of them to enjoy the family happiness. Xiaobao and Xiong Xiaoan locked themselves in the room to discuss important matters. Under the influence of his fourth aunt, Xiaobao began to plan carefully. First of all, what kind of daki did he hope to build? What about Little Bear and Xiaoan? It was a very peaceful night. Qi Heiran and Mu Yangling didn't even notice that the three children chatted until the third watch before falling asleep. However, history has named this night as the Night of Rise. On this night, the three teenagers determined the direction and general path for the development of an empire in the next few hundred years. The various policies and foreshadowings of Emperor Taikang after he ascended the throne are also based on the tone set by the three teenagers that night. At this time, the plan for the rise in history was just casually written by Xiaoan on a few pieces of paper, and left on the desk as a draft. People outside didn't know what happened to the royal family recently, so everything was calm, but there was a lot of turmoil in the palace. First, the two maids who had just been assigned to the East Palace were transferred away, and then the Queen's case was transferred to the court. The beauty picture of the prince's choice of side concubine was emptied. In the end, the concubines who had princes in various palaces were notified by the queen that the princes were not allowed to teach human affairs before the age of 16, so as not to damage their health. And going to the study room is to establish a new course biology, which evolved from the yin-yang studies of the Wangfu. For the most important. For this reason, Mu Yangling specially wrote a letter to instruct Lu Ting to lead his staff to compile some basic knowledge of agricultural planting techniques and grain cultivation, and then publish it into a book. The book will not only be used for royal teaching, but will also be sent to various bookstores for external promotion. In order to allow more people to learn to pay attention to planting technology. And many people have benefited from this book, and cultivated rice seeds with high yield but high quality, breaking the barrier of high yield and poor taste. And Lu Ting is addicted to publishing books. Almost every breakthrough in the experimental farm and Sinong temple will be published as a book and published. Behind the scenes, he will list some problems that he and his colleagues cannot solve, and extensively solicit opinions to make agricultural development faster. And Lu Ting also became a famous university student in Daki. This development can be said to be beyond Mu Yangling's expectation. One who only taught the difference between men and women, yin and yang, learned the palace, and then it became a comprehensive biology. Qi Xiaoyuan didn't expect that at that time he wanted to copy the yin-yang studies of the Wangfu, but Fang Xiaofu refused. The difference between men and women still needs to be discussed in class. Even if it is taught by an imperial physician, he will not agree, because it is really difficult to be elegant. There is no way. Qi Xiaoyuan can only think of a way. If he is not willing, then change the course, not only to teach the difference between men and women, but also teach some basic medical knowledge. And everything in the world can be used for medicine. Plants, animals, and even minerals are useful, so the scope is wide. With a swipe of his pen, Qi Xiaoyuan changed yin-yang studies to biology, mainly to teach the princes some basic biological knowledge. And these creatures include the grains and food that we see every day, as well as medicines, and there is only one article about people. The human chapter naturally divides men and women, and the knowledge in it covers a wide range. It can be said that the yin and yang studies taught by Wang Tai is covered in the human chapter. In this way, Fang Xiaofu has no objection, but unexpectedly pushes Daki's agricultural development a step forward, which is really a pleasant surprise. Of course, This effect was not seen until many years later. At this time, the palace was shaking because of the queen's new regulations. Concubine Zhao was the first person who was unwilling, because the second prince was already 9 years old, and the children in the royal family were well nourished and naturally precocious. If there was no accident, he would come to primary school in 2 or 3 years, and he could arrange tutoring at that time. The court lady of personnel affairs, and then the side concubine. The status of the Zhao family is not very high. She thinks about her son's main concubine, but she can arrange for a side concubine. With her backing, the niece may be able to give birth to the eldest son. 40 years of prosperity. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1139. There are quite a few concubines who have the same idea as concubine Zhao. If the prince delays knowing about his personnel until he is 16 years old, wouldn't he have to be 16 or 17 before accepting his side concubine? But at this age, you can marry a concubine. The concubines in the harem except the empress are all from small families, and their family background cannot match that of the prince. Even if they are the prince's biological mother, it is impossible for the son to marry his niece as the main concubine, so we can only place our hopes on the side concubine. And she is the side concubine who can give birth to the eldest son. Because of the abolition of the vassal system before, the concubines in the harem didn't treat Prince Rong's family in various ways. Hearing that the source of this incident was also the palace, they panicked. But everyone is not as obvious as concubine Zhao. Although they also expressed dissent when they went to greet the queen, their faces are not as ugly as concubine Zhao. Li Jinghua said solemnly, "This is the rule of my Daqi royal family. It was determined by me and the emperor after careful consideration." The faces of the concubines changed, they didn't expect the queen to be so strong in this matter. Concubine Zhao opened her mouth to question, when she caught sight of concubine Su and the others bowing their heads from the corner of her eyes, her mind changed and she immediately closed her mouth. Why am I always in the lead? The benefits are not for me, but there are a lot of disadvantages. Concubine Zhao closed her mouth and lowered her head. The queen raised her eyebrows slightly when she saw this, but the anger at the beginning subsided a little. After everyone left, she sighed with Wen Kui, "Concubine Zhao is so smart." Wen Kui thought of concubine Zhao's character, shook her head and said, "I'm afraid it won't last long, and the second prince will still suffer." Li Jinghua was non-committal, "The emperor treats the princes equally, how can it be so hard?" What she cared about was the looks of the concubines just now, they were still respectful to her, I'm afraid it was all on Aling's head. Thinking of Chi Heiran's hatred some time ago, the queen couldn't help sighing, "Prince Rong and Aling have offended people, I'm afraid they don't know it." Wen Kui smiled and said, "Your Majesty, don't worry, in the heart of the emperor, all the concubines in the harem combined are not as important as the prince and princess. That being said, villains are hard to guard against, not to mention these people are still the emperor's bedside people, and they have sons." Li Jinghua sighed, "I'm worried about the future. Even if the emperor and Chi Heiran can continue to be brothers, but what about him in 100 years? As long as these concubines say a few more words to their sons, even if the princes combined cannot shake Chi Heiran's status, there must be a lot of troubles. When the time comes, who knows what will happen?" In the final analysis, this matter was still their negligence. If they had communicated well in advance, and the abolition of the vassal system was brought up by others, or directly by the emperor, so many troubles would be avoided. But money is hard to buy, I knew it earlier. Li Jinghua could only worry in her heart. These actions of the palace are not big, because Qi Ziyuan has a strong control over the palace, as long as he doesn't want the news from the harem to spread, no one can pass the news to the outside. Therefore, people outside the royal rules set by him and Li Jinghua have never been aware of it. When the new year is approaching, the crown prince presides over palace banquets and often appears in front of the ministers. Everyone is surprised that the crown prince has grown up. However, the prince not only does not have a side concubine, but even a concubine, which is obviously abnormal in the royal family that has always married early. Those who were worried asked the officials of the East Palace, and only then did they know that the prince is so old that he doesn't even have a housemaid, which means that the prince is so old but still doesn't know about personnel. All the ministers looked at the prince with some concern. Through the imperial study room to discuss the state affairs, several ministers vaguely mentioned to the emperor that the prince should talk about marriage. Before talking about marriage, someone must teach the prince about personnel affairs, which is also a vague reminder. Who knows that the emperor smiled when he heard this, and said clearly, "My children of the chief family should not marry early. I have agreed with the empress that no prince should marry under the age of 17. Your Majesty, before all the princes marry their main concubines, they can first accept side concubines and several concubines." "How about arranging side concubines for His Royal Highness?" Yan Du suggested. Qi Ziyuan smiled lightly and said, "That is the rule of the royal family of the previous dynasty. Why should I, De Qi, abide by the palace rules of the previous dynasty?" There was a silence in the imperial study room. "Does the emperor mean that the rules of the royal family have to be changed?" Qi Ziyuan said, "My Daqi imperial family has no rule of accepting a side concubine before marrying a main concubine. Since the first wife is a married wife, naturally there is no reason to establish a concubine first." "What about the concubine?" The ministers looked at Qi Ziyuan. "This one doesn't need any status. You can't let the princes be chickens before they get married, right?" Qi Ziyuan smiled, and began to talk about the way of keeping in good health, implicitly expressing that he is an emperor who pays attention to keeping in good health, and hopes that his children and grandchildren will do the same. So for the sake of health, the princes will arrange concubines by the court after they are 17 years old, and then talk about getting married. So you are right, the prince is really a chicken before the age of 17. Ministers. Some people want to object, "This is not a private matter of the royal family, the prince only gets married after the age of 17, so it must be too late to have a child. This is not a good thing for De Qi." Qi Ziyuan stopped their mouths with only one sentence of emotion: "According to their life, their days are considered good. Back then, I didn't get married until I was 21, and Prince Rong didn't marry Princess Rong until 18. Of what else can everyone say? Even the founding emperor and Prince Rong only got married at that age. How big of a face do they have to ask the princes to get married early? That's it." Qi Ziyuan took advantage of the opportunity and mentioned that the age limit for marriage in the law should be amended. The age limit for women was raised from 13 to 15, and the upper limit was also raised to 20. The ministers looked at each other, because the age of the prince's marriage was postponed first, and everyone's reaction to this law was not very big at this time, and it was passed after a little discussion. Xiaobao was very happy when he heard about it, and said to his father, "Little Xiong and I thought about going to the discount after the new year, but I didn't expect that the father would solve it with just a word." Qi Ziyuan was a little complacent. "It's about rising first and then suppressing it. If I mention this first, they will definitely have to argue. It's not bad if I can raise my age by 1 year in the end, but because I mentioned your matter first, compared, they will relax about it. Even if this incident is over, you and Xiao Xiong don't always focus on this. After the Chinese New Year, you go out to practice, and I will find a place for you." Little Treasure's eyes lit up, and he demanded, "Father, I'm going to the Northland." Little Xiong said that the Northland is magnificent, and I haven't been there yet. Qi Ziyuan thought for a moment, nodded slowly and said, "That's fine, there is a large piece of lost soil that has just been taken back. The hearts of the people must not be settled yet, so you can go and have a look." Xiao Bao was happy. "Will Little Bear go with me too?" Qi Ziyuan shook his head. "Little Xiong is going to the army, he is different from you, and the place he goes to is naturally different. Xiaobao was disappointed for a moment, but it was quickly covered up by the excitement of going out of Beijing. Hurry up and prepare the palace banquet. This is the first palace banquet after the victory. It will be a big one. There will be envoys from various countries to congratulate you. You are the prince, so don't mess it up. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1140. This is the first time that the prince is in charge of holding a palace banquet independently, even with the queen helping behind him, he is still too busy. So he directly asked his younger brothers to help. Little Xiong and Xiaobao grew up together, and they know each other best, and they have the most tacit understanding. They can do things with half the effort, and Xiaoan is supplementary on the side, and the cooperation efficiency of the three has been greatly improved. The tiger head and the little lion dragged Qi Wensu around the venue to make trouble. Of course, in their words, they were helping to monitor whether people were doing their best. Little Bear wanted to throw them out, but Xiaobao and Xiaoan finally stopped them. Xiaoan said with a smile, "Let them make trouble, we will know if there are any deficiencies when we follow them, they are good at filling in the gaps and finding leaks." Xiaobao replied with a smile, "That's why I brought them here. If it weren't for the third and fourth brothers who are still young and afraid that they will bump into each other here, I would definitely bring them too. You must know that they are the ones who are most likely to cause trouble. If this place can support the toss of these boys, then there should be nothing missing." With a few big indulgences, the tiger-headed little lion and Qi Wensu ran more happily in the field. This is the most grand New Year's Eve palace banquet since the founding of Daki, not only because Daki's treasury is rich, but also because they have recovered a large area of lost land in the north this year. Although there have been occasional disasters in the past 2 years, it can generally be regarded as a bumper harvest, so civil servants can praise the phrase "the country is peaceful and the people are safe." This achievement was achieved in the 12th year of the founding of the People's Republic of China, which can be said to be rare in all dynasties, and they are also responsible for this. Therefore, when the ministers of civil and military affairs entered the Jiao Tai Hall, they were all beaming and proud. This time, the palace banquet is still divided into seats. Like the previous dynasty, men and women are not separated. Counting it, this is also a great pioneering work of Emperor Sejong. He established a rule that the palace banquet should be shared by husband and wife, following the Tang system. Therefore, although the status of women in the previous dynasties was greatly reduced compared with that in the Tang dynasty, it was not as severe as in the previous Song dynasty. As soon as Mu Yangling and Qi Heiran entered the Jiao Tai Palace, everyone was watching them, and she was startled by the enthusiasm in their eyes. Qi Heiran walked ahead without changing his face, and led her to sit down on the first seat on the lower left. Opposite him is the crown prince, with Fan Zijin at the bottom, and several princes sit on the bottom of the crown prince and Zijin, one on the left and one on the right, and then the left and right ministers representing the officials. Seeing that Fan Zijin could sit above the prince, all the ministers lamented his favor and whispered that he might be the next prime minister. Before he could say a few words, the emperor and empress arrived. Qi Heiran hurriedly stood up and knelt to greet him. Mu Yangling knelt beside Qi Heiran, only to hear a voice from above chuckle and say, "Ping Shen, today is New Year's Eve, for the purpose of pleasure, you don't have to be restrained." That is to say, but it may not be all about enjoyment, because the palace banquet is not only enjoyed by the emperor and ministers of Daki, but also envoys from various countries come to pay their respects. Nearby are Xixia, Goryeo, Dongying and the Chen dynasty of Vietnam, and far away are Western countries such as Spain, Portugal, England, and France. Xixia's civil war is raging fiercely, and this time the envoys will be sent to Qi to remind Daki of the covenant between them, and hope that Daki will not take advantage of the danger to attack Xixia. As for the fact that they sent troops to aid Dajin before, it was attributed to a misunderstanding by Xixia, because they sent troops to help Dajin quell the civil strife. Who knew that they bumped into Daki's army by mistake, and fought in a daze. In order to apologize, Dajin also brought several carts of gold, silver, and jewelry over. This is also a disguised form of showing weakness and bribery. Chi Xiuyuan didn't give an accurate answer, but he also knew that Daki, who had just won the victory against Dajin, was not suitable for launching another war, so he could only wait. Waiting for the next opportunity to come, or a peaceful settlement to take back the field occupied by Xixia. But now there are not many lost lands in Xixia's possession, which is why Chi Xiuyuan is not in a hurry. He took it calmly, but Xixia was in a hurry. The Xixia envoys visited Beijing with gold and silver for a few days, but they all hit a wall. You know, this kind of situation almost never happened when Xixia was facing the Great Zhou, and the officials of the Great Zhou had always begged them with gold and silver. At this moment, in reverse, they felt ashamed, indignant, and annoyed, but there was nothing they could do. The envoys of Xixia didn't know that the officials they visited were the ones who complained. This is at the foot of the emperor. The emperor and Prince Rong hate corrupt officials the most. These envoys come to the door with gold and silver and don't know how to avoid people's sight. Not to mention that they don't have the intention of accepting bribes, even if they do, they dare not reach out. Xixia's envoy held the treasure in his hand but couldn't send it out, and his chest was clogged with blood. And they are also blocked by the Western countries who are seeking. In contrast, Korea, which is purely here to fight the autumn wind, and Chenkei, who come to inquire about news and hope to establish diplomatic relations, are much easier. After the monarchs and ministers have met, they will naturally meet with the envoys from various countries, and this order is also very particular. The first to come up is Xixia, which is quite powerful, followed by the Chen dynasty, which borders Daki but has a good relationship, then Koryo, and the third is Dongying. These are neighboring countries. There are also some interests involved at this time. The envoys of the Western countries were announced together. There is no way, the Western countries are too far away from Daki. Apart from business contacts, Chi Xiuyuan really can't think of what else they are involved with. Since he can't tell the good from the bad, then let's announce it together. The envoys of the Western countries bowed to Chi Xiuyuan on one knee. Chi Xiuyuan nodded slightly, and sat down after waving the ceremony. Only then did everyone see the 100 officials sitting in 2 rows, 1 seat for 2, and another seat for family members behind them. The relationship was clear at a glance. There were delicious food and wine on the desk, as well as some dishes that the envoys had never seen before. It was impossible not to be shocked. Western countries are still defecating everywhere, the nobles don't take a bath twice a year, and the food is even more lackluster. During the time they came to Daki, they have seen the wealth and abundant supplies of the Han people, but none of the previous experience was as shocking as this one saw. It turned out that this was Dachi's palace banquet. Even Andrei, who has traveled to this continent for more than 20 years, lost his mind for a moment. Antonio sat on his seat for a long time before he came back to his senses. He looked at the slightly distant Daki emperor and said, "I finally understand why you always like to come to this continent to do business. This is indeed true. It's a beautiful country." Andrei, who attended the palace banquet as the deputy envoy of Spain, lowered his voice and said, "Its land is huge, and its resources are abundant. It is the richest country I have ever seen in my life, so we have a lot to do on this continent." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1141. Antonio's heart was agitated, and he said slightly excitedly, "This is our Spanish opportunity, if we can." Antonio's voice was barely audible, and Andrei looked at the direction of Chi Heiran and his wife in a daze. Judging from his experience in dealing with Daki officials, it is very difficult to tear flesh on this continent. And starting a war is simply not feasible. This country has just gone through a major war in the past year. It has the most soldiers and the strongest army he has ever seen. Unless the country is in chaos again, it will be difficult for them to start. Many thoughts turned in Andrei's mind for a while, and he came back to his senses when the superior emperor raised his wine glass. No matter what these envoys thought in their hearts, they all raised their wine glasses, smiled, and congratulated this powerful country on the new year. Mu Yangling drank the alcohol in the glass, glanced at the direction of the envoy, and said to Qi Heiran, "Andrei also became the envoy of Spain? Isn't he a businessman?" Qi Heiran glanced at the group of people, and said, "He also has a title on him, and he is the most familiar to me, De Qi, among many foreigners. It is not surprising that he can become an envoy. In this regard, other countries are much worse. There are no familiar faces who came to Beijing for the first time, and it seems that they are all visiting Daki for the first time. Qi Heiran doesn't pay attention to them. For him, these people are not as attractive as the singing and dancing in the venue." Qi Heiran has never understood why Mu Yangling is so wary of Western countries. It is true that they may have bad intentions towards Daki, but their country is hundreds of thousands of miles away from Daki, and their national power is far less than Daki, so there is really no need to value them so much. For him, the biggest threat to Daki still comes from land, such as Xixia, such as Daywan. Regarding the positioning of Western countries, Qi Heiran has always placed them as tradable business partners. Seeing that Mu Yangling was still paying attention to the Westerners, Qi Heiran turned his head and said to her, "Where are these little hooded guys going? You have to watch them closely, don't let them cause trouble, all officials are watching." Mu Yangling's attention was immediately diverted, and he turned around to look for the children, only to find that only Xiao Xiang and Xiao Bao were still sitting obediently across from each other, and the other children, including the second, third, and fourth princes, had gone to nowhere. Mu Yangling turned his head to look at Fan Zijian, who was sitting next to him, and saw that Xiaoan and Xiaofu, who were sitting honestly, had disappeared. Now Mu Yangling couldn't sit still anymore, so he hurriedly got up and said, "I'll go and have a look." Qi Heiran originally said it casually, but now he realized that something was wrong, the brats were really gone. At this time, Xiaoan and the others were hiding in the back hall to change the clothes of the servants. Seeing that Xiaofu had also taken off his clothes and wanted to change, Xiaoan hurriedly pressed his hand, "You are still young, how can such a small servant come to the hall to serve you? Go back and sit beside your parents, we will tell you when we come back." Xiaofu was not happy, "You always don't take me to play, I won't be with you next time. Didn't you meet Westerners when you were in Guangzhou? Wen Qian and Wen Mi didn't meet us before they went to see us." Xiaofu's eyes were full of confusion, "Have I seen Westerners? Oh, he was too young at the time, so he definitely doesn't remember." The tiger head turned around twice, and finally came up with a bad idea, "Why don't you hide behind us and watch? It doesn't matter if you are a little smaller, we promise don't let anyone find you." No, how could he not be discovered as a living person? Xiaoan felt that Huda came up with a bad idea. "Then we can't leave Xiaofu alone." The two cousins quickly quarreled, and Little Lion and Wensu hurriedly persuaded the fight, "Okay, stop arguing, and attract people." The third Prince Ji Wenqian and the fourth Prince Ji Wenmai stared blankly at the quarrelsome people. Didn't they say they wanted to take them to observe the Westerners up close? Why did they quarrel instead? The more the little lion persuaded, the more angry he became, and he didn't know what the sentence was wrong. He first quarreled with the tiger head, and Wensu was sweating profusely trying to persuade the three of them, and finally pinched his waist in anger and shouted, "You guys, let's make a noise, make a fight, and you will make a noise for fourth ant in a while." The tiger-headed little lion and Xiaoan had already quarreled over such trivial matters as who ate an extra piece of dim sum last night. In the end, Xiaoan went back rationally, and shouted, "I won't quarrel with you, and I will attract the little eunuchs here in a while. If something happens, none of us will be left alone." Mu Yangling and Xiao Xia stood at the door and asked curiously, "What are you doing to make it public?" There was silence in the room, and the children turned around stiffly to look at the door, only to find that Mu Yangling and Xiao Xia were standing at the door looking at them with half smiles. Xiaoan and the tiger-headed little lion immediately stood in a row tacitly. Wen Su hurriedly pulled the two younger brothers forward to stand in line with them, blocking a pile of eunuch clothes behind him. Xiaofu screamed, ran from Xiaoan to the fourth prince's side, and finally ran back in a panic to hide behind his own brother, and would not come out even if he died. "Xiao Xia! Xiaoan! Children!" Mu Yangling looked at them condescendingly, pointed behind them and smiled, "You seem to have forgotten the height difference." Huda raised his head to look at his mother, then at their heights, and thought to himself, "I don't know if it's too late for them to stack up." In the end, Mu Yangling couldn't help itching his hands and gave them 2 slaps on the buttocks, and then began to interrogate them. Xiaoan was in a low mood. He thought he was well organized, because he assisted the crown prince in preparing the palace banquet before, so he was very familiar with the layout of the Jiao Tai palace, not to mention very familiar with the servants, but he also knew them all. "Just put on your clothes, lower your head, bypass the patrolling servants, and make 2 turns with the jug in your hands to reach the Western envoys. Qi Wenkan and Qi Wenmai can see whatever they want. But I didn't expect that the mission would fail, and the problem still lies in the quarrel between him and Hutu, which is simply a failure." Xiaoan was sad for her failure, but she didn't know that Xiao Xia was so angry that she wanted to beat him up. This is the imperial palace, how could she do whatever she wanted? Mu Yangling was speechless, and said, "You want to see Westerners go over and see openly, why do you have to make so many troubles?" Qi Wenkan said in shame, "But the ministers of the DPRK and China seem to dislike these Westerners very much, and even the seats are so far behind. If we come forward so rashly, I am afraid that we will be impeached by the officials." Everyone was watching the prince's every move, and they didn't want to be impeached by the officials just because they saw something strange. Mu Yangling's face darkened, and he said to the 2 children seriously, "You are not young anymore, you should be able to distinguish right from wrong. Some words of the officials can be heard, but some don't need to care about them. You are princes, you can do whatever you want, go openly, such sneaking will damage the prince's prestige." Then I went to teach Xiaoan and the tiger-headed lion a lesson. You 3 are the elders, not to mention taking good care of your younger brothers, but also leading them to misbehave. If the Western envoys expose your identities on the spot, the dignified princes of a country will come and go wearing the clothes of the servants. Palace banquet, do you know how the envoys will look at you, Daki? The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1142. The children lowered their heads when they were told. Xiao Xia took a deep breath, and said with a straight face, "What are you still doing in a daze? The palace banquet is halfway through, why don't you go back and sit down?" Huda boldly said, "Then we will sit with Big Brother and the others." Little Bear was impatient to sit next to his parents, and when the banquet started, he did not follow the rules and sat next to Xiao Bao. There were 3 seats filled with children. It was fun at first glance, but the key was that there was very little restraint. As soon as Huda said this, the children all looked at them eagerly. Mu Yangling looked down at them from above, and said with a smile, "Do you think I will agree?" The children suddenly became sleepy like frost-beaten eggplants. Mu Yangling and Xiao Xia took the children back. The banquet was in full swing. The envoys from various countries had just presented the gift lists on behalf of their countries. The envoys from England took the opportunity to propose the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries. Chi Xiaoyuan smiled and expressed welcome to all countries to come and communicate with Daki. Daki is a hospitable country and welcomes friends from afar. The envoys from the Western countries looked at each other, and brought up the duty-free customs again. Of course, the envoys from England also hoped that Daki would allocate a place for their ships to rest. Chi Xiaoyuan narrowed his eyes. If Heiran didn't remind him, he would still be willing to allocate 1 or 2 villages in order to show Chi's prestige. But Daki only mentioned a little reciprocity, and let them pass the customs duty-free for Daki's ships, and also allocated a small area for Daki's fleet to rest, but the other party shirked it in every possible way. Chi Xiaoyuan is not a fool. Although he hasn't figured out what's tricky up to now, he also knows that it's not good. Otherwise, why would the other party make excuses? Chi Xiaoyuan picked up the wine glass to drink, and he didn't need to ask the minister to deal with it. Sure enough, the Minister of the Household Department immediately expressed his welcome to merchants from England to Daki for business, and Daki was also willing to provide convenience for merchant ships from all over the world. Turning the topic around, Minister of the Household Department also said that Daki now has a lot of merchant ships going to sea for business, and it is also difficult to berth for supplies. I hope England can also help Daki. Of course, we can discuss the follow-up matters afterwards. The envoys from England were silent, and the envoys from other Western countries were also slightly silent. It seems that Dachi still refused to let go of his promise. They have changed envoys twice for this matter, and the cost of each mission is quite a lot. The ship has cargo, and such consumption can't afford it. Mu Yangling pursed her lips and smiled. As long as she was there, they would never take advantage of it. Antonio put down his wine glass, and whispered to André, "The officials of Daki seem to be not very friendly to us." André also discovered that the officials of Daki paid more attention to the envoys of several other eastern countries. Especially in the country called Zixia, although the officials of Daki and the envoys of the other party often sneered and spoke in an unfriendly tone, the fact that the other party was able to sit at the top of the envoy group showed that they valued each other. André thought for a while and said, "These countries are relatively close to Daki, and some even border on them, so it is understandable that they are valued. It is their country. If they choose among the surrounding countries and Daki, they will also choose the surrounding countries, and Daki is too far away to threaten their land." After thinking about it, André understood Dachi's concerns. He rolled his eyes and said, "There is a saying in the Han people that the sky is high and the emperor is far away. Dachi's territory is too vast. If we can find someone who is willing to accept us officials with gifts, then our goal will be achieved. It's better to be justified," Antonio said almost inaudibly. André looked in Chi Heiran's direction, and said, "If we can convince that prince or his concubine." Antonio heard André mention this couple more than once, and followed his gaze. "Is that them?" "Yes," André said with a smile, "very interesting couple." It was very interesting that Chi Heiran and his wife were exchanging seats. Chi Heiran and Fan Zijian sat drinking together, while Mu Yangling and Xiao Xia sat together to watch the ladies in the arena. Xiaobao is about the same age, so the marriage will be settled in 1 or 2 years, and the marriage will be ready in 1 or 2 years. By then, Xiaobao will be 18 years old, which is in line with the rules set by the emperor. So this time, everyone who has daughters or granddaughters of the right age has been brought into the palace. Maybe they will be selected by the emperor and queen? That's why there are many pretty and lovely girls in the palace banquet tonight. Mu Yangling watched with great interest. The Xioxia family had a lot of contacts and told her in a low voice about the talents and character of those little girls. Of course, except for a few people who knew her own opinion, everything else was the reputation of those little girls. The two were talking, but they didn't know that their son was also the target of other ministers. The crown prince has only one position as the main concubine, and the side concubines are all selected from the families of officials below the third rank. Moreover, the crown prince's father-in-law is not so easy to be. Compared with Xiaoxiang and Xiaoan, they are much more popular. Xiaoxiang is the heir of Prince Rong's mansion, and Xiaoan is the heir of Prince An's mansion. Both mansions have hereditary titles, which is more secure than being a prince and concubine. Because the prince left the palace to open the mansion as a prince, but the second generation is the county king, and the third generation is the duke of the state. After the third generation, who knows that he was once a royal relative? As for Prince Rong's mansion and Prince An's mansion, unless the grandparents had a brain attack and rebelled, the titles would always be prince and county king, and their prosperity would last forever. Therefore, in Jiaotai Palace, besides the girls who are 13 or 14 years old, there are also many girls over 9 years old and under 13 years old. Mu Yangling didn't know the inside story, so he whispered to Xiao Xia, "These ministers are too mad. They brought a 9-year-old baby here, and they will only be 13 in 4 years. They are not as good as Ji. Maybe they went after some princes." Wen Su. 9 years old and 9 years old are about the same age. What about those 11 or 12-year-old girls? Female Junior, holding a golden brick, Xiao Xia guessed hesitantly. Fan Zijin on the side couldn't help but rolled his eyes in his heart, turned his head and lowered his voice and said, "They're looking at our son. Do you think they're all heading for the royal family?" Fan Zijin glanced at the little girls and said, "If you have time, take a look. If there is something good, let me know, and I will let Zioan pay attention in advance." Xiao Xia was shocked, and stammered, "Well, I have to pay attention to my daughter-in-law." Fan Zijin said angrily, "You think you're still a 28-year-old girl? Your son is already 10 years old, and in 2 or 3 years, we're going to formally marry him. Why don't you start paying attention now?" Mu Yangling also opened his mouth wide in shock. Fan Zijin glanced at her, and finally decided to talk to Heiran about Zioxiang's marriage. "Little Xiang is 13, and it's time to formally say goodbye. It will take 2 or 3 years to decide, and after another 2 years, he will be 18. Fan Zijin curled his lips when he said this. "Don't always spoil Aling, let her go to various houses, don't stay in the palace all the time, don't she have to personally inspect the woman's character?" Chi Heiran also opened his mouth in shock. "I'm going to be a father-in-law. Isn't it going to be a grandfather soon?" When Fan Zijin saw Rongxian and Yan Du who were sitting next to him look over, he wished he could kick Chi Heiran into the middle. "Can't you keep your voice down? We're whispering, do you understand? Do you know what a whisper is?"